Ellen, welcome to another edition of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, our coverage that is. Here are the headlines this hour. The European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen to travel to Baku today to seek more natural gas for Azerbaijan. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky fires his security chief and top prosecutor, accusing them of treason. And Russia instructs its army to prioritize destroying Ukraine's missiles and artillery. We're beginning today with the news that the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen will be traveling to Baku, Azerbaijan to seek more natural gas from the country. It says as the EU seeks to reduce its reliance on Russian energy. The Commission said on Twitter this morning, amid Russia's continued weaponization of its energy supplies, diversification of our energy imports is a priority for the EU. President von der Leyen and Energy Commissioner Kadri Simpson will be tomorrow, which is today, in Azerbaijan, further strengthen the cooperation. Our draft document says the Commission has proposed to EU countries a deal with Azerbaijan to increase imports of natural gas and support the expansion of a pipeline to do this. And back in Ukraine, President Volodymyr Zelensky says he's spoken with the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau about not accepting a decision to return a gas turbine intended for a Russian pipeline, as it would encourage more sanctions violations for Russia. He was making the comment in his nightly video address, saying he spoke to Mr. Trudeau earlier and thanked him for his support, but stood by his action. On Wednesday last week, the Canadian Prime Minister had said it was a very difficult decision to grant an exemption from sanctions imposed on Russia for the return of the repaired turbine needed for the Nord Stream 1 gas pipeline. The Ukrainian president, however, echoing early remarks by other Ukrainian officials, says Russia is engaging in blackmail with gas.
I spoke today with the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau. Of course, we discussed our cooperation, and I thanked him. I thanked Canada for its support, but I separately emphasized that Ukrainians will never accept Canada's decision regarding the Nord Stream turbine, which was decided to be handed over to Germany in violation of the sanctions regime. This issue is not just about the turbine. This is a matter of compliance with sanctions. If there's one violation now, it is only a matter of time before there will be others. Russia deliberately does this blackmailing with gas and provoking violations of sanctions. There are enough routes for the transit of Russian gas to Europe, and every country must maintain principles.
Meanwhile, a shake-up in the government. President Zelensky has fired the head of the country's security agency, the SBU, as well as the Prosecutor General, citing many cases of treason in both powerful organizations. He says more than 60 former employees were now working against Ukraine in Russian-occupied areas, adding that a total of 651 collaboration and treason cases have been opened against law enforcement officials. The sacked officials, Ivan Bakanov and Irina Venediktova, are yet to comment on their dismissals. The sacking of SBU chief Ivan Bakanov, who's a childhood friend of Mrs. Zelensky, follows a high-profile arrest of a former SBU regional head in Crimea, annexed by Russia in 2014. Oleg Kulinich is suspected of treason. Senior intelligence officials based in Kherson have also been charged, and Mr. Zelensky suggested that further action will be taken against other SBU officials. It's been long assumed Ukraine had a problem with Russian infiltration on its security services. In his speech, Mr. Zelensky sought to lay out the impact of repeated security breaches.
As of today, 651 criminal proceedings have been registered regarding high treason and collaboration activities of employees of prosecutors' offices, pre-trial investigation bodies, and other law enforcement agencies. In 198 criminal proceedings, relevant persons were notified of suspicion. In particular, more than 60 employees of the prosecutor's office and the security service of Ukraine remain in the occupied territory and are working against our state. Such an array of crimes against the foundations of national security of the states and the connections detected between the employees of the security forces of Ukraine and the special services of Russia pose very serious questions to the relevant leaders. Each of these questions will receive a proper answer. Today, I made the decision to dismiss the Prosecutor General from office and to dismiss the head of the security service of Ukraine.
In other news, Ukrainian soldiers fighting in the eastern Donbass region say they need more weapons to improve the country's artillery capability. Unit Commander Dmytro says although there are training exercises to improve target skills with armor-piercing rounds, there's room for improvement in Ukraine's artillery, but that they were all working on it, and that Ukraine's allies are providing vital munitions, though it needs more supplies. Now, earlier this week, Ukraine's International Legion spokesperson, Damian Magru, said the country's heavy artillery, is outnumbered roughly 8-1 by Russian guns, putting Ukraine at a significant disadvantage. While the focus of war, now in its 5th month, has moved to Ukraine's eastern Donbass region, Russian forces have been striking cities elsewhere in the country with missiles and rockets in what has become an increasingly attritional conflict. Russia, which launched what it called its special military operation against Ukraine on February 24, says it aims to root out what it terms dangerous nationalists, saying it uses high-precision weapons to degrade Ukraine's military infrastructure and protect its own security. Well, speaking of Russia, Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu is said to have instructed the military to prioritize destroying Ukraine's long-range missile and artillery weapons. Ukraine says it carried out a string of successful strikes on 30 Russian logistics and ammunition hubs using several multiple launch rocket systems recently supplied by the West. Overnight, at least 10 explosions were reported in the southern city of Mykolaiv, but there was no information on casualties, while 2 people were killed and 10 wounded in Avdiivka and Novi Donbass, according to Ukraine's general staff, citing local officials. A British Defense Ministry said on Sunday Russia was reinforcing defenses across areas it occupies in southern Ukraine after pressure from Ukrainian forces and pledges from Ukrainian leaders to drive Russia out. Well, the country's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has slammed French President Emmanuel Macron's proposal to create a European community as a deliberately confrontational idea with anti-Russian intentions. Mr. Lavrov was making the comment in an interview for Russian media earlier today. He said, so far they have been advertising the European political community initiated by French President Macron, where there will be no particular financial or economic benefits, but there will be demands for full solidarity with the EU on its anti-Russian actions. This is no longer an or principle, but a who is not with is against us principle. Macron himself explained what the community is. EU will invite all European countries to join in, from Iceland to Ukraine, but not Russia. I will point it out right here that we don't need to go there, but the statement itself, which unveils the nature of this deliberately confrontational dividing idea, is noteworthy. Mr. Lavrov's words. President Macron's proposed community will be a framework for European Union members and democratic European non-members to discuss shared interests. Its overriding goal will be stabilizing the European continent, according to French media. In another development, Russian President Vladimir Putin is expected in the Iranian capital Tehran tomorrow. Talks with his Iranian and Turkish counterparts on the conflict in Syria. Russia and Iran support the Damascus regime against its opponents, and Turkey backs rebels. Tuesday's summit comes as Turkish President Recep Erdogan has threatened to launch a new offensive in northern Syria against Kurdish fighters. Iran, whose President Ibrahim Raisi is hosting the meeting, has already warned that any Turkish military action in Syria could destabilize the region. The Tehran summit will also enable Mr. Erdogan to hold his first meeting with President Putin since Russia invaded Ukraine in February. Australia's Foreign Minister Penny Wong says her country remains committed to seeking accountability for the victims of the downed Malaysia Airlines flight MH17. This is the 8th anniversary of the event, which killed 298 passengers and crew, including 38 Australians. She said in a statement, since 2018, Australia has maintained that the Russian Federation is responsible under international law for the downing of flight MH17. This is based on the strong body of evidence presented by the Joint Investigation Team. Ms. Wong said Australia and the Netherlands were pursuing accountability through a dispute against Russia in the International Civil Aviation Organization, adding that Australia condemns Russia's unilateral, illegal and immoral aggression against the people of Ukraine. It is a painful reminder of the tragic circumstances surrounding the downing of flight MH17. Oh, and the UK says Russia is failing in Ukraine, but that Moscow will continue to be a challenge for the West for a long time. That's according to Britain's Chief of Defence Staff and Navy Admiral Tony Ratigan in an interview recorded on Friday. He said there was a relatively stable regime in Russia despite Western sanctions, and that President Putin has been able to crush any opposition.
Started this invasion with the ambition to take the whole of Ukraine. Russia had the ambition to take the cities in the first 30 days. Russia had the ambition to create fractures and to apply pressure to NATO. This is Russia as a challenge to the world order. Russia is failing at all of those ambitions. Russia is a more diminished nation than it was at the beginning of February, and that's what Ukraine is seeing. I think it's definitely psychological. These are not military targets. These are acts of terrorism. These are random events where President Putin is endorsing the taking out of civilians and creating civilian casualties. There will be war crime investigations, but what it reflects is how Russia is struggling, how Russia is not fighting a conventional war. For us as military professionals, we see a relatively stable regime in Russia. We see that President Putin has been able to quash any opposition. And then we see a hierarchy that is invested in President Putin. And so nobody at the top has got the motivation to challenge President Putin, and that is bleak. That's why the challenge of Russia is going to endure way beyond 2022 and 2023 and 2024. This is going to go on for a long time.
Joining me now is Associate Professor of Ukrainian Studies at the University of Cambridge, Rory Finnan. Rory, I appreciate you joining me this morning. I know it's pretty early. Do you agree, though, with Navy Admiral Tony Ratigan that Russia is failing in Ukraine? I mean, Russian forces have increased attacks on Ukrainian cities over the last few weeks, even hitting new targets.
I think Navy Admiral Ratigan is correct in his assessment that Russia is failing militarily. But we need to be thinking about short-term gains and short-term objectives and long-term gains and long-term objectives. I think Admiral Ratigan is clear-eyed about the Kremlin's interests and its belief in its own endurance, that it can continue this war when the West cannot, when the world will not, that we will all around the world eventually lose interest. We can see this apathy setting in public journalistic discourse around the world, and that's why I really commend Channels Television for this program, for the fact that you call it a Russian invasion. That's very important in establishing for various publics around the world who's responsible for this war. So Admiral Ratigan is correct that the Russian military is failing, and we can see that it's not been able to advance as vigorously as it's wanted, particularly in eastern Ukraine. This shows us, I think, over the long term, the means and approaches that the Kremlin will take in this war, which is to terrorize civilians, to try to break Ukraine's will. The problem there, of course, is that Ukrainians have shown in the darkest of hours that their will not be broken, because they have seen what happens when Russian military forces and political proxies occupy their territory. They've seen it in territory well beyond Ukraine, in Chechnya, in Transnistria, along the Moldovan border. They've seen the gray zone that has become Crimea, which doesn't really have a future. So the choice is very stark for Ukrainians: existence or victory, and that's the way we need to be thinking about this war as well.
Yeah, but the tenacity of the Ukrainians is really commendable. But if you do monitor, Russia's movement across Ukraine, especially in the eastern part of the country now, and all the cities that it seems to be bombarding at the moment, Mykolaiv being the most recent, you will agree that, it's only a matter of time, though, before the Ukrainians begin to feel a bit weary of this war.
We're so far into this war, and I think the question of fatigue and will is one we need to always ask in the context of a military engagement like this one. But the Ukrainian populace has been, I think, energized by the brutality of this invasion, and if their backs have not been broken and their will has not been broken, to this point, I don't see it changing. The issue here is, of course, how much damage can be done against the Russian military. So we need to be, of course, focusing on the provision of advanced artillery weaponry from the west to Ukraine. That's made a big difference in eliminating various Russian ammunitions depots across occupied eastern Ukraine and along the south above the Azov Sea. These have been very big strategic gains. They also do not target civilian areas as well. So these are surgical targets that this weaponry is able to achieve. And I think those victories on the Ukrainian side show us that the only choice Russia has right now is, as you put it in your segment earlier, it's blackmail. It's terrorizing civilians. This is a regime lurching from one evil act to another. The Ukrainian side has been trying to maintain that moral high ground, and I think it's done so. And we need to, around the world, keep focusing on three major things here: that this is a neo-colonial war of conquest and aggression, that this is a war that's genocidal in nature, that is, it's seeking to eliminate a freestanding Ukrainian national identity and those who embrace it. And the third is that this war, again, is something that the Kremlin sees as a long-term proposition, that this isn't going to be something that will be concluding in the coming months. And I think the world has to decide here to make the clear-eyed decision that we need to support a Ukrainian victory, because the outcome, any other outcome would be, I think, disastrous, not only for Ukraine, but for the world order such as it is. We need to be very clear that our legal institutions are severely wounded already by the Russian invasion, and that it is seeking to, harm civilians all across the world through this hunger policy, and that is a threat to everyone everywhere.
But you still find Russia thriving, even though it is in isolation to much of the rest of the world, all thanks to the sanctions from the European Union and all of the countries within NATO.
I think we have to keep in mind that the sanctions regime is something we need to look at from a long-term objective too. That these sanctions that many of us thought would be disastrous for the Russian economy, they didn't quite have the impact and consequence that we had anticipated. But that was because the Kremlin had been preparing for this moment for quite some time. And they also are very clear in their own discourse, if one watches Russian state television, to the various comments made by different representatives of the Kremlin. They're very convinced that the world's going to lose interest in this, that the world is going to eventually stop backing Ukraine. And that's why, of course, we as viewers, as citizens, need to keep that support going for as long as we can, to express an international solidarity, to deliver the weapons that Ukraine can use to defend itself, to keep supporting it financially, and to show that we actually have a backbone and a will as well, because we understand the broader geopolitical and moral stakes of this kind of war, in which one country invades and bombards citizens of another simply because it can, simply because it considers it a colony, simply because it considers it less of a state than itself. This is a very dangerous way of thinking that we can see spill into countless other global conflicts if we don't stop this now. So the sanctions, I think, is something that we need to keep increasing, but we need to be thinking about how over the next 6 months, 12 months, are these sanctions eventually going to put Putin in a corner and to cause people around him to be thinking differently about this particular leadership. The one thing I appreciate in your segment as well is this clear-eyed view about the Russian public support of this war. at least half the country is supportive of this conflict, partly because they've been fed lies through Russian disinformation channels for a very long time, absurd lies about Nazis and extreme nationalists in Ukraine. Couldn't be farther from the truth. Ukraine is a place where far-right nationalism is, in relative terms, a very minority political position. There's no far-right party in parliament, for instance. Contrast that with a host of other European countries, and you see how Ukraine is quite different. So these lies have been, I think, affecting the Russian public for a very long time. And then those lies latch on to a long, I think, centuries-old colonial chauvinist view of Russians toward Ukraine and Ukrainians. And that's become a poisonous brew that sadly we are not going to be able to solve anytime soon.
Rory, it's been a real pleasure speaking with you. Thank you for joining me this morning.
Thank you.
Now, after the break, the European Union asked for patience on anti-Russia sanctions. See you soon. Welcome back to the program. We've been talking about Russia hitting new cities in Ukraine. A mayor of the city of Mykolaiv, Alexander Senkevich, says Russian missiles have hit industrial facilities over the weekend. As we know, immediate information about the casualties, but regional governor Vitaly Kim says the city came under massive shelling in the early hours of Sunday. There's more on attacks from the weekend. The Ukrainian city of Mykolaiv has come under heavy shelling by the Russian forces since Thursday last week, when footage showed firefighters attempting to put out fires next to a destroyed building. The location of the video was later verified by nearby buildings and roads that matched satellite and file imagery of the Admiral Macrons National University in Mykolaiv. Once again, the city has been hit by Russian missiles. Over in the Donetsk region, plumes of smoke are seen rising into the sky as emergency workers rush to tend to wounded residents after a missile attack. The attack hit a residential area in the city of Pokrovsk, killing and seriously wounding local residents. According to the head of Donetsk Region Police, Ruslan Ospenkov, the aggressor shelled the city with multiple rocket launchers at 1-hour intervals. The exact number of casualties is still being determined, he says. But while the Russian Defense Ministry has said nothing about the weekend attacks, it did, however, gloat over shooting down a Ukrainian Mi-17 helicopter near the eastern town of Slovyansk and an Su-25 aircraft in Kharkiv region, as Moscow steps up its military operation. The army also said its long-range air-based missiles have destroyed a depot in an industrial zone in the city of Odessa that stored Harpoon anti-ship missiles delivered to Ukraine by NATO. And on Sunday, relatives and local residents said a final goodbye to 4-year-old Lisa Dmitrieva, who was killed in a Russian missile strike in Ukraine. The girl with Down syndrome died on Thursday after a strike hit the Ukrainian city of Vinnytsia, killing 24 people in total. Her body was found in the debris next to a pram. Images of her pushing the same pram posted by her mother on a blog less than 2 hours before the attack quickly went viral. Her severely injured mother was not able to attend the funeral as she was being kept in an information blackout at a hospital for fear that finding out about her daughter would kill her. Ukrainian officials say a steady flow of Russian military equipment continues to move westward from Mariupol towards other parts of southern Ukraine, where Ukrainian forces are on the offensive. Assertion is supported by recently geolocated video of Russian armor moving through parts of southern Ukraine. Petro Andrushenko, an advisor to the mayor of occupied Mariupol, said a large convoy of up to 100 units of military equipment passed through the city in the direction of Zaporizhia region on Saturday. In addition, a large number of Russian soldiers brought in by Kamaz trucks settled in the villages of Nikolsky and Manush districts, 2 districts west of Mariupol. Some independent analysts believe the Russians are moving forces westward, potentially to support Russian forces that are on the defensive in Kherson after coming under attack by Ukrainian long-range weapons. Yesterday, Ivan Fedorov, the mayor of Melitopol, said there had been a number of explosions south of the city where Ukrainian saboteurs blew up a railway bridge in April. He gave no explanation, but Russian bases in the region have been struck by long-range Ukrainian artillery at least 3 times this month. And at least 1 person has been wounded in overnight shelling in the southern Ukrainian town of Nikopol, beg your pardon. This is according to the head of the district's military administration. Yevgeny Yevtushenko wrote on Telegram this morning, the extent of the destruction in Nikopol is being specified. At this minute, the only victim with a wound has been hospitalized. No dead have been found. The emergency services and the regional governor said heavy Russian shelling also hit Nikopol on Saturday and killed 2 people. Now, TV editor Marina Osyanikova, who interrupted a live broadcast in March with a banner condemning Russia's military operation in Ukraine, was detained in Moscow region on Saturday, according to a statement posted on her social media. The whereabouts of the former Channel 1 employee is currently unknown, according to the Post. Officials have not made any comments on her apparently being taken into custody or any reasons behind it. Later in the day, she was released. The detention came 2 days after she staged a protest outside the Kremlin, condemning the ongoing conflict in Ukraine and specifically the deaths of children during the hostilities. She displayed toys covered in blood during her stunt and held a placard branding Russian troops fascists. Imagery from the scene shows no action was taken against her during the protest. In the meantime, the group of 20 major economies of finance chiefs have reached a strong consensus on issues including a global food security at a 2-day meeting in Indonesia over the weekend, but they're still divided over Russia's war in Ukraine. Indonesia's Finance Minister Sri Mulyani Indrawati said in the closing news conference that there were still differences within the G20 on issues related to the war. She adds that the war is included in the 14-paragraph chair summary as an expression of position. However, the group has agreed on the need to resolve the worsening global food security crisis and issues related to climate change. Sri Mulyani says it is the best result the group could have made. She also stated that a joint discussion between finance and agriculture ministers will be established to adopt concrete actions to combat the food crisis.
Have the stand which cannot yet be reconciled. Of course, there are other forums, for example, like UN and others in this case. But because they want to express their view regarding a certain issue, this is in particular related to the war, then that particular statement related to the war, reflecting there is still views which is different within the G20. So we just put it there as a expression of position from each country or group of country. I think this is the best result in which all member countries, including also the international organization, they are very much aware that the world needs even more and more collaboration, because we also realize that almost all issues, no country, no matter where they are, where their position, how strong, how high, how rich, they cannot solve this problem alone. You talk about what? Food security, you talk about energy security, we talk about climate change, we talk about pandemic, we talk about inflation. These are all still interconnected. So we agree that we need to continue maintain the spirit of collaboration and cooperation and multilateralism. That is strongly viewed, and that is exactly the spirit of this G20, which I think we can be very proud that this is still continued to be maintained until our presidency today.
EU Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell has called on Europeans to show strategic patience while months' worth of sanctions against Russia take effect. Mr. Borrell said these sanctions imposed by the EU and like-minded partners are already hitting Vladimir Putin and his associates hard, insisting their impact on the Russian economy will only increase, adding that Europeans need strategic patience until Russia stops its aggression and Ukraine is able to regain its full sovereignty. Let's talk more business now, and I'm being joined by our business correspondent, Laddie Williams. Great to see you this morning.
Good morning. Great to see you.
You want to talk about, of course, the European Central Bank selling over $12 billion of its gold reserves during the war, according to the deputy head. Why is that?
Well, at the end of the day, there were speculations that they were trying to use, this gold to shore up the hryvnia. But the deputy governor has come out to say that, what? We're actually doing this to actually help our importers, bring in the much needed products that, the Ukrainians need at this time, talking about medicine, food and, other critical, imports that they need at this point. But at the end of the day, we know the economy is under attack at this point, even though they're getting some, donations from other countries, in form of cryptocurrency and support, by their allies at this point. By the end of the day, they're having to dig into their, gold reserve to, try and, help their importers at this time. It's not an easy time for them. It's a country that's at war, at this point, so they have to do that.
Really not an easy time for them. I think it was last week that we reported that the IMF had said Ukraine was still financing, its debt.
Exactly.
And that it should continue. So how do you fight a war and you keep financing your debt?
And you still, have to finance your debt.
And you're expecting donations.
Yes, and at the end of the day, you have to finance your debt so that at the end of it, you can still go back there and get more debt even after the war. So they have to, juggle all of these things at this point.
Yeah, and I think that, European countries are also looking towards shoring up, natural gas and, oil for the winter.
Yeah.
You prepare for winter in the summer, so I guess that's what they're doing.
Yes.
And Ukraine, the conflict in Ukraine has also sped up Germany's green energy transition.
Yeah.
Talk to us about that.
Yeah, so at this point, we're seeing how Europe is struggling, to keep up, with their gas needs. And, at this point, we see what Russia is doing. They said they're doing a maintenance on that Nord Stream 1, pipeline. But at the end of the day, analysts are saying, hopefully, they actually turn on the taps, after this supposed...
They said they were doing maintenance.
Exactly.
Routine maintenance.
Routine maintenance.
On the Nord Stream 1.
But we know how, Russia can be quite unpredictable. So it's time for Europe to actually look at, speeding up, some of that transition process. They were aiming for 2030, to, improve that energy and electricity mix, for the country. Have, as much alternatives, because at the end of the day, this geopolitical tension has shown that reliance is a very risky adventure.
So where are they looking to?
So they're looking at, improving other, clean sources of energy, because right now they're having to use a dirty alternative, that's coal-fired, stations. But at the end of the day, it's a temporary action for them at this point, because nobody saw this coming, when it comes to their energy supplies, being cut off. Nobody saw that coming, but it's happening, and it's happening really fast. And, other countries have come up with different plans about, net zero by 2060, 2030, all like pledges.
They have to move faster.
But now they have to move faster
because a lot faster.
The reliance is not working out, at this point.
Yeah, explain to me, this talking point I have here on Russian jets demands dropping and hitting Boeing.
Yeah.
Russia not demanding enough Boeing, enough
planes.
from Boeing?
Yes.
Okay.
And
that's because of the war, right?
That's because of the one. Boeing is actually cutting their, forecast for, how many planes they're going to be selling, going forward up to about 2040. They were hoping for about 41,000, planes, but, and Russia, demands about, they were hoping to get at least 1,500 planes, to Russia. But, with all of these sanctions, with the aviation space and all of that, they've had to cut back on that outlook. And also we have rising energy costs. That's also impacting travel. And they're saying, you know what, with rising energy costs, geopolitical tension, we have to cut down, our outlook, for sales, because they were looking at about 4%, but they've cut that down to about 3.5%. At the end of the day, it's plain to see, because
how much of an impact is that on, the aviation sector worldwide?
Oh, it's a huge impact, because at the end of the day, we're talking about jobs here. We're talking about, people moving around the world. But, with this, it will also impact the company, because that would impact their revenue if they're not making the sales that they expect to make. It's going to impact Boeing, as a company. But at the end of the day, they're looking at, okay, you know what, the forecast is looking quite bleak, but at the end of the day, if we can get maybe Russia to, end this war at some point, and we get people moving around easily, and energy prices actually go down, they might, get back demand, that they're actually looking for, talking about Boeing.
Yeah, but could it also have been hit by, the pandemic as well?
Oh, yes,
could
the
that
pandemic
also have contributed greatly to the drop in Boeing sales? And
looking at, China still having pockets of infections and, lockdown risks, that is also weighing, on demand at this point.
Well, I know you had a very busy weekend monitoring news, across the world.
Right.
But the G20 meeting also held over the weekend. And, it seemed like, Indonesia didn't want a lot of focus on the Russian invasion of Ukraine. They wanted to keep the politics out.
Right.
Yeah, but they also talked about other things. And I think the finance minister, we heard her just a minute ago, talking about other issues she said were more important: the global food security crisis, issues relating to climate change. What progress do you think?
And the interesting part is, talking about, food security at this point.
I was going to ask what progress they have made towards that.
Well, they are trying to make some progress at this point, because we're seeing, grain prices, come down, but it's due to seasonalities at this point. But at the end of the day, the war is the cause of these food security issues we're having. Both countries, produce over 60% of the grains, and oils that, the world uses at this point. So we cannot run away from Russia-Ukraine crisis. The attention still falls back there. Even when it comes to climate change, we're seeing how Europe is having to, go back to dirty alternatives, because they're not getting, the gas that they need from Russia. So we cannot sweep, Russia-Ukraine war under the rug at this point. At the end of the day, where they're putting attention to is still because of this war.
We're going to your favorite topic now, Nadi, which is the markets.
Yeah, the markets.
You want to talk about how they're doing, right?
Yes.
For this week, what are we expecting?
Well, this week, at least last week, we saw the markets actually end the week, positive. But, it's rate-setting season, at this point. So we're expecting a lot of volatility, in the markets, talking about the U.S., we're seeing that the U.S. is talking about it, maybe a 75 basis point, rate hike. Analysts, we're looking at 100, and we're seeing the dollar actually strengthening, because of, most of these rate hikes we're seeing. So we're expecting volatility with equities market. Right now, the U.S. futures are looking good this morning. It's green. The crypto market is looking good. You're seeing Bitcoin over $22,000. So
that should make some people happy.
Yeah, traders are quite happy. But, this market is quite volatile. It remains to be seen how, the rest of the week plays out in the market. I always look out for the Thursdays, because that's when I see most of those sell-offs, into the weekend. So it's cautious optimism, we're seeing in the market right now.
Yeah, you'll be talking more about this at 10 o'clock, I suppose.
Right.
Laddie Williams, great to have you here.
Thank you.
Now, after the break, a Munich brew pub discovers a novel solution to beating Europe's cooking oil shortages. We'll have more on this. Stay with us. Welcome back. Few buildings remain unscathed in Saltivka, a working-class suburb in Kharkiv in eastern Ukraine, where a lot is going on. Months of relentless bombardment by Russian forces have turned one of Ukraine's largest neighborhoods into a ghost town. Everywhere you look, buildings are partially collapsed with black burn marks on the walls, blown-out window frames and roofs punched by shells. Glass shards, rubble and personal possessions litter streets, yards and playgrounds. Saltivka neighborhood, which had been home to about 300,000 people before the invasion, bore the brunt of Russian shelling on Kharkiv, a city which had a population of 1.4 million people before the Russian invasion drove many to flee. Meanwhile, a working-class suburb of Kharkiv in eastern Ukraine, the trams are running again. A revived tram service is a spot of joy for residents who still live there following Russia's invasion in late February. A city was built in the 1980s. The Soviet-era streetcars may look rickety as they rattle past war-damaged buildings, but for local people, they represent a step back towards something like normal life in a district that came under heavy bombardment. One passenger who hopped onto a tram when the service restarted said it cut his travel time to work from 4 hours by various buses to just 40 minutes. On February 27, 3 days after Russia invaded Ukraine, a tram's electrical power station was destroyed by heavy shelling, as was their depot shortly after. The district tram officials say that Saltivka's roughly 160 trams, part of the Kharkiv city fleet, were destroyed. 60 of them were destroyed, another 60 was damaged. The remaining 40 are now returning to service after Ukrainian forces retook the area around the country's second largest city in May. Only a small percentage of Saltivka's pre-war population remain due to the heavy bombardments that it has suffered. The UN's deputy spokesperson, Farhan Kak, has condemned attacks against civilians or civilian infrastructure, reiterating his call for accountability for such violations. Speaking to reporters earlier, May also gave an update of the situation in Vinnytsia, where UN humanitarian colleagues on the ground are supporting people impacted by attacks.
You will have seen that yesterday the Secretary General said that he is appalled by the missile attack against the city of Vinnytsia in central Ukraine. He condemns any attacks against civilians or civilian infrastructure and reiterates his call for accountability for such violations. And we also have an update on the situation in Vinnytsia, where our humanitarian colleagues on the ground are supporting people impacted by yesterday's attack. The World Health Organization, with support from the NGO Médecins Sans Frontières, has donated trauma kits and other medical supplies to the city's hospital. For their part, the International Organization for Migration and the UN Refugee Agency are helping local authorities provide emergency shelter, critical supplies, and psychological support. The Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, which has an office in Vinnytsia, says that the death toll is rising, with at least 23 people confirmed to have been killed so far, including 3 children. More than 10 people are still missing. Local authorities tell us that more than 400 rescue workers continue to clear the debris and search for survivors.
Sports news now. Shakur Donetsk is seeking 50 million euros worth of damages from FIFA and has filed papers in the Court of Arbitration for Sports appealing a ruling that allows foreign players to unilaterally suspend their contracts. The dispute rests on a FIFA ruling announced on June 21st, which stated that foreign players and coaches in Ukraine have the right to suspend their contracts with Ukrainian clubs until June 30, 2023. The mutual agreement can be reached by June 30 this year. Shakur Donetsk had 14 foreign players on their books. The club's revenue streams had already been decimated by the war, and as such, Shakhtar had intended to sell their foreign players to recover vital funds, both to cover the club's losses and assist their humanitarian response to the war. Meanwhile, the vice president of the Bobsleigh Federation of Russia, Elena Anikina, has ruled out an immediate appeal to the Court of Arbitration for Sports after the International Bobsleigh and Skeleton Federation, Congress, changed its status to impose an official ban on the country's athletes from competing at its events. Delegates at the Congress in Lausanne voted to give the IBSF Executive Committee new powers, with the body now able to take protective measures in the event of unforeseen events such as terrorism, war, riots, epidemics, or nuclear or chemical contamination. The IBSF also has the authority to suspend federations or individuals for the necessary time and cancel or relocate events. Russia's official state news agency, TASS, has reported that Anikina believes that it is unlikely it will appeal now on the basis that it will be very difficult to win the trial due to changes to the IBSF statutes. Away from sports news, farmers in central Crimea have invented their own way to demonstrate their support of what Russia calls a special military operation in Ukraine. At the start of harvesting, they marked the letters Z and V onto the wheat field, with each letter measuring 100 by 100 meters. Both symbols, in addition to the letter O, commonly decorate Russian armor and trucks taking part in operation. Combine harvester driver Alexei Matis said he volunteered to mark the letters on the field because the idea appealed to him. Grain is currently a major world issue, according to another farmer, adding that the wheat from his field would be even more tasty as the letters absorbed the sweat of farm workers, combined drivers and truckers. Moscow will remember annexed Crimea in 2014 after the Revolution of Dignity, also known as Maidan, forced Ukraine's now former pro-Russian president, Viktor Yanukovych, in exile. A majority of the international community denounced Russia's actions and continue to recognize the peninsula as a part of Ukraine. Now, a Munich brew pub has found a novel way to beat Europe's cooking oil shortages, letting customers pay for their beer with sunflower oil to ensure plentiful stocks for frying schnitzel's. With Ukraine and Russia accounting for about 80% of global exports of sunflower seed oil, many European countries, including Germany, have seen supplies dwindle since Russia invaded its neighbor in February. Managers at the Giersinger Brewery, a brew house and pub in the southern city of Munich, think they may have the answer, offering beer lovers a liter of their favorite beer for the same quantity of sunflower. While a liter of beer costs €7 in German pubs, 1 liter bottle of sunflower retails for about €4.5, making the offer tempting for many customers. One customer brought 80 liters of sunflower oil in Ukraine during a trip to deliver humanitarian aid, swapping his shipment for 8 crates of beer for his birthday party. He said that the campaign is cool, we can get cheaper beer, and yes, Giersinger Brewery also helped. And that's it on the program today. Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Bani.